I woke up under fluorescent hospital lights, with my throat still burning, like it remembered the moment it closed. The first time, it happened in Morocco, on what was supposed to be my honeymoon. The second time, it happened in my own home, at the bottom of my own stairs. And the part I can't stop replaying isn't the pain or the panic. It's the look on my husband's face both times. Because Paul wasn't just scared. He was betrayed by the person he'd spent 8 years protecting like his own heartbeat. His daughter, Ashley. I'm Catherine. I'm 45. I teach English at a high school, which means I've spent most of my life believing that if you choose the right words, you can reach people. You can calm storms. You can make sense of chaos. But there are no right words for the moment you realize an 18-year-old girl planned to hurt you on purpose. There are no lesson plans for the sound of your husband whispering, "I didn't know she could do this," like he was saying it to himself more than to me. And there is definitely no way to prepare for a message from your stepdaughter's best friend that says, "Plain as a confession." It was the perfect plan to show Dad her true colors. When Zoe showed me those texts, my hands went cold around my coffee cup. The cafe noise blurred into a low hum, like my body was trying to protect my mind from catching up. Because it wasn't just that Ashley disliked me. It wasn't teenage attitude or grief or adjusting to change. It was strategy. It was escalation. It was a girl who knew my allergy, watched me take a bite anyway, and sat there while I started to die. And then, months later, when she couldn't control the story anymore, she used her body like a weapon and sent me down a staircase like I was nothing but an obstacle. People keep asking me the same thing. Are you leaving Paul? And I keep thinking the real question is, how do you stay married to a man whose greatest love is also the greatest threat to your life? Before Ashley became the reason I flinched at sudden footsteps behind me, she was just a name, Paul said, with a softness in his voice I could hear even when he was annoyed. Ashley would love this. Ashley hates mushrooms. Ashley's having a hard week. It was always Ashley, not in a way that felt selfish, but in the way you talk about someone you're responsible for keeping alive, like the word itself was a promise. I met Paul at our neighborhood recreation center, one of those places that smells like disinfectant and old basketballs, where the walls are covered in kids' drawings and flyers for charity runs. I volunteered with the after-school reading program. He ran youth soccer clinics. We saw each other in hallways, in the parking lot, at that little counter where someone always forgot to restock the paper cups. At first it was small talk, a smile when we passed, a, "Hey, good session today," a laugh when a kid sprinted by with untied shoes, like the laws of physics didn't apply to them. Then one evening, I was wrestling a box of books toward my car, too proud to admit I'd overestimated my upper body strength, and Paul stepped in without making me feel weak. "Let me," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. We ended up talking there in the parking lot for a long time. He told me he started volunteering to show Ashley the importance of giving back. He spoke about his daughter the way people speak about sunlight after a long winter, with relief and reverence. His wife, Rachel, had died of lung cancer when Ashley was 10. 8 years, just the two of them. I remember how careful Paul was when he said her name, as if grief still lived in the room and he didn't want to startle it. I should have taken that as my first real warning. Not about him, but about the shape of his life. Grief doesn't disappear. It rearranges the furniture. It makes certain rooms in a person's heart permanently locked. When Paul asked me to grab coffee, I hesitated. Not because of him, because of me. I'd been divorced for years. Greg and I were college sweethearts who married young, and slowly he turned into someone I couldn't reach. More dinners without him. More nights where his phone buzzed and he'd flip it face down. Then the affair. The messy divorce. The humiliation of realizing I'd been faithful to someone who treated loyalty like a punchline. After that, I stayed single. I poured my energy into teaching, into volunteering, into being a person with structure. Safe, predictable. Paul wasn't like Greg. He listened, really listened. He asked questions and waited for the answer. He remembered small details. He never made me feel like I was too much for wanting reassurance. Our first coffee date turned into 3 hours. We talked about hiking trails, old documentaries, recipes we swore we'd make and never did. He didn't push. He didn't rush. He made space for me to unfold at my own pace. But even in those early months, Ashley was always the sun in his orbit, and I respected it. When it was time to meet her, I tried so hard to do it right, I probably came off nervous and eager in the exact way teenagers can smell like blood. I bought her a book by her favorite author. Paul told me which one, thinking it could be an easy bridge. Dinner at their house was polite on the surface and cold underneath. Ashley barely looked at me when I handed her the book. "Thanks," she mumbled, and put it aside like it was something she'd throw out later. Throughout dinner, she answered with one-word responses and stared at her plate like it held a map out of the conversation. Paul tried to fill the silence. I tried to ask gentle questions. It felt like talking to a locked door. I told myself, she's grieving. She's young. This is normal. So I gave her space. I kept trying, softly, steadily. I offered to help her study. "I don't need help from someone who probably doesn't understand current teaching methods, huh?" she said, her voice flat, her eyes never quite meeting mine. I suggested a family hike. She agreed and walked far ahead with earbuds in, making sure the distance between us stayed physically real. Sometimes she'd bring up memories of her mom right in front of me, then glance at me like she was daring me to react, like she wanted to catch me slipping, like she needed proof that I was a threat. And I did what women like me are trained to do. I swallowed it. I stayed patient. I kept telling myself love would soften the edges. I didn't realize Ashley wasn't just waiting for time. She was waiting for a moment. A crack. Something she could use. If tension had a sound, it would have been the way Ashley said my name. Not loud, not openly hostile. Just sharpened. Catherine. Like she was testing how it tasted in her mouth. Like she was reminding herself I existed. At first, her hostility lived in small, deniable places. Comments that could pass as jokes if you squinted hard enough. "That dress looks kind of young for someone your age, don't you think?" She'd say it lightly, eyes flicking to Paul like she wanted him to laugh. He never did. He'd clear his throat, change the subject, tell her to be respectful. She'd shrug, smile like she hadn't meant anything by it. When I cooked, she'd take a single bite, push the food around, then order takeout an hour later. The first few times, I pretended not to notice. After that, it became impossible to ignore. She also had a way of bringing Rachel into the room without ever saying my name. "Mom used to make this better. Mom never overcooked chicken. Mom always knew what Dad liked." Each sentence landed like a comparison I wasn't allowed to respond to, and I didn't. I sat there, hands folded, smile polite, trying to be someone grief couldn't accuse. Paul noticed. Of course he did. Late at night, after Ashley went to bed, he'd rub his face and sigh like the weight of everything was finally allowed to drop. "She's struggling," he'd say. "She needs time." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I told myself that if I stayed calm, if I stayed kind, things would eventually level out. But they didn't. They escalated. For Ashley's 16th birthday, I tried to do something special. I planned a surprise party, friends, decorations, her favorite chocolate cake. I coordinated everything quietly, carefully, wanting it to feel like a gift, not an intrusion. When she walked in and saw the decorations, she didn't look at me. She looked straight at Paul. "Why did you let her do this?" she snapped. "You know I hate surprises." Then she went to her room and locked the door. Her friends arrived confused. Paul stood there, apologizing, making excuses. I cleaned up streamers and plates, fighting the sting behind my eyes. That night, when the house was quiet again, I cried in the bathroom with the fan on so no one would hear. I talked to Paul, more than once. He acknowledged it. He said her behavior wasn't okay. But every sentence came with an explanation, a cushion, a reason. She lost her mom. She's afraid. She feels replaced. And maybe all of that was true. But fear doesn't excuse cruelty. As Paul and I grew closer, Ashley grew sharper. She started forgetting to pass along my messages to him. He'd come home worried because he hadn't heard from me, only to find out later she'd had his phone in her room. She told his parents I'd said disrespectful things about Rachel. Completely false. For weeks, they treated me with polite distance until Paul finally confronted them and cleared it up. Then came the fake social media account. At first, I thought it was a troll, messages calling me old, ugly, saying Paul would eventually leave me just like my ex did. The writing style felt familiar. When Paul confronted Ashley with evidence, she denied it, then shrugged. It was just a joke. Family counseling was suggested. Ashley sat silently through sessions, answering with one word until the therapist admitted there wasn't much progress to be made if she refused to engage. Still, I kept trying. Invitations, small gifts, olive branches offered with trembling hands. I later found some of those gifts in the trash. And somewhere in all of this, Paul started to break. I'd find him staring at nothing, phone in his hand, torn between the daughter he loved and the woman he'd chosen to build a life with. He told me once, voice barely above a whisper, that he felt like he was failing both of us. That's when I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just discomfort. This was a slow tightening, A pressure building in a house where one person's grief had turned into something dangerous, and no one knew how far it would go. Paul proposed on a quiet weekend by a lake, the kind of place where the water stays still enough to hold your reflection without distortion. No crowd, no spectacle. Just us, standing on the dock as the sun dipped low, turning everything gold. When he took my hands, they were steady, but his voice wasn't. I don't want to build the rest of my life without you in it, he said. I know it won't be easy. I know my life comes with weight, but I want us. I want you. I said yes without hesitation. For a few days, it felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. Then we told Ashley. The explosion came fast and loud, like something that had been pressurized for years, and finally found a crack. She screamed at Paul that he was betraying her mother's memory. She accused me of manipulating him, of slipping in when she wasn't looking. She said I was trying to erase Rachel, trying to steal something that didn't belong to me. You're choosing her over me, she yelled. If you marry her, don't expect me to be part of your life. Paul stood there pale, shaking but firm. I'm not choosing, he said. I'm expanding my life. Loving Catherine doesn't mean I love your mother, or you, any less. Ashley locked herself in her room for 2 days. From that point on, it felt like she shifted from resistance to strategy. Every step toward our wedding came with friction. Misdirected calls, half-truths planted with relatives, moments engineered to make me look like the villain. Still, the wedding happened. Ashley refused to attend. We left an empty seat for her at the ceremony, a quiet hope stitched into the front row. I tried not to look at it, but Paul did, over and over, like his eyes couldn't help searching for the child who wasn't there. Afterward, he admitted how much it hurt. And then, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed with good intentions alone, he suggested we bring Ashley on our honeymoon. Morocco. I hesitated. I had imagined something else for our first weeks as a married couple. But Paul looked desperate, like this was his last chance to prove he hadn't abandoned anyone. So I agreed. The flight was tense. Ashley barely acknowledged me. At the hotel, she went straight to her room. The first day was manageable, civil, distant, but calm. That night at dinner, she even asked me a few questions about my teaching job. I went to bed feeling something dangerous. Hope. The next morning, Ashley knocked on our door while Paul was still asleep. Do you want to get breakfast? She asked. Just us? I was stunned and foolishly thrilled. At a small cafe near the hotel, she ordered for both of us, insisting she'd researched local specialties. When the dessert arrived, pastry topped with ice cream and chocolate, I didn't question it. I took one bite. My throat tightened instantly. The world narrowed. My chest burned. I tasted panic before I tasted air. Peanuts, I tried to say, my voice barely there. I need help. Then everything went dark. I woke up in an emergency room, Paul gripping my hand like he was afraid I'd disappear again if he let go. The doctor said the words anaphylactic shock and lucky in the same sentence. While I was unconscious, Paul learned the truth. Ashley had specifically requested peanut butter. She knew about my allergy. She always had. Paul confronted her immediately. And for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't soften his voice. He sent her home from the honeymoon that day. Cut her off financially, except for college tuition. Told her her behavior was unacceptable. The rest of our honeymoon felt muted, like we were walking through a world someone had turned the volume down on. Markets, mountains, colors, all dulled by the realization that something had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. When we returned home, Ashley was still living with us until college started. She showed no remorse, only anger. And that was when I started to realize the Morocco incident hadn't been a breaking point. It had been a test. And Ashley wasn't done. After Morocco, I didn't explode. That surprised people when they heard about it later. They expected screaming, ultimatums, a dramatic line in the sand. Instead, I went quiet. Not because I wasn't angry, but because my body had learned something my mind was still catching up to. I wasn't safe. Safety isn't just about locked doors and sharp objects. It's about whether you can sit at your own table without checking every ingredient twice. Whether you can walk down the hallway without bracing yourself for a comment, a look, a shove disguised as an accident. When we got home, Ashley moved through the house like a storm cloud that refused to rain. She barely spoke, spent most of her time in her room, emerged only to eat. When she did talk, her words were clipped, flat, edged with resentment. She never said sorry. Not once. Paul tried to talk to her, gently at first, then more firmly. She shut down every attempt. She's dramatic, Ashley said when Paul brought up Morocco. I didn't think it would be that bad. That sentence stayed with me longer than the hospital wristband. I didn't think it would be that bad. As if my body had been an experiment she hadn't expected to go wrong. I started to notice changes in myself. I checked labels obsessively. Even foods I'd eaten safely for years suddenly felt suspicious. At a restaurant one night, when the server couldn't guarantee something was peanut-free, my heart started racing so fast I had to excuse myself to the bathroom and sit on the floor until the panic passed. Paul found me there, crouched like a child, and didn't say a word. He just sat with me, his back against the wall, breathing slow until I could match it. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. And this time I knew he meant everything. Living in that house became exhausting. Not loud exhausting, quiet exhausting. The kind where your shoulders never drop, where your nervous system stays alert even when nothing is happening. Ashley overheard me on the phone with a friend once, talking about my anxiety. Later that day, I heard her laughing in her room, telling someone, "She's such a drama queen. Dad always falls for it." Something inside me hardened then. I stopped trying to fix her, stopped offering olive branches, stopped pretending patience would magically turn into protection. Paul and I started couples counseling, not because we were falling apart, but because we were both drowning in the same storm and didn't know how to keep each other afloat. He admitted he felt like he'd failed Ashley by not getting her help sooner. He blamed himself for her anger, her cruelty, her escalating behavior. I told him something I'd been holding in for weeks. Understanding her pain doesn't mean accepting her violence. He nodded, but I could see the guilt twisting inside him anyway. Then came the night that ended the pretending. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard them arguing in the living room. Ashley's voice was sharp, frantic, spiraling. "She ruined everything. You chose her. You forgot Mom the moment she showed up." Paul tried to calm her, tried to reason, tried to ground her. I paused on the stairs, not wanting to escalate things by entering the room. Then Ashley saw me. Her face changed instantly. The rage wasn't loud, it was focused. She rushed me before I could even step back. I remember the shove, the sudden absence of balance, the sickening realization that gravity doesn't care about intent. I woke up in the ER again, this time with a concussion. Paul told me later that he didn't hesitate. He called an ambulance and told Ashley to pack her things and leave, that he couldn't have her in the house if she was going to be physically violent. As I lay there, head throbbing, I felt two things at once: relief and grief. Because something had finally been acknowledged out loud, and something had finally broken beyond repair. The second hospital bracelet stayed on my wrist longer than the first. Not because the doctors told me to keep it, but because I couldn't bring myself to cut it off. It felt like proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. Proof that what had happened wasn't teenage acting out, or a bad moment, or misunderstood grief. Proof that the line had been crossed with force. When I was discharged, Paul insisted I stay in bed, even though lying still made my thoughts louder. He took time off work without hesitation, moving through the house quietly, like he was afraid even the sound of his footsteps might startle me. Ashley was gone, staying with Paul's parents. The house felt hollow. Not peaceful, just emptied of tension in a way that made the silence feel heavy instead of calm. Paul barely slept. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone, refreshing a screen that never lit up. "She hasn't texted," he said once, like that alone was another injury. On the third day home, his parents came over. I braced myself for blame, for that tight politeness that masks judgment. Instead, they surprised me. They apologized. They told us Ashley had given them a very different version of events, that I'd taunted her about replacing her mother, that I'd threatened to make Paul cut her off financially, that the shove was a reaction, not an attack. Paul didn't raise his voice. He laid out the facts. Morocco, the allergy, the stairs. His parents sat in stunned silence. His father, Bernard, finally spoke. "We love our granddaughter," he said slowly, "but we will not excuse lies or violence." They told Ashley she could stay with them until college started, but only if she agreed to therapy. She agreed, reluctantly. 10 days later, Ashley texted Paul and asking to meet him alone at a coffee shop. I encouraged him to go, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I knew he needed to see her clearly, without me in the room as the supposed problem. He came back 3 hours later looking older. "She apologized," he said, "for pushing you." Then he paused. "But she still thinks you're trying to come between us." When he asked her about Morocco, she said she didn't realize how severe my allergy was, that she thought I'd just get a mild reaction. Paul didn't believe her. Neither did I. The most disturbing part came next. Ashley showed Paul a box she'd kept hidden in her closet. Inside were Rachel's journals, Entries written during the worst months of her illness, fearful, angry, grieving things no one writes when they're okay. Ashley had found them at 15 and had been reading them over and over, letting them become the lens through which she saw everything. Paul had never known they existed. When he asked to take them home, Ashley refused. That night, Paul cried in a way I'd never seen before, deep, guttural, like something had finally cracked open. The next day, something unexpected happened. I got a message from Ashley's best friend, Zoe. She asked if we could meet, said there were things I needed to know. Paul was wary. I was terrified. But I went. In a public cafe. Daylight. People everywhere. Zoe didn't waste time. She showed me texts. Messages where Ashley bragged about the Morocco incident, calling it the perfect plan to show Dad her true colors. Messages where they discussed sabotaging our relationship, planting doubts, escalating situations. Zoe admitted she'd enabled it at first. Felt sorry for Ashley. Thought it was just talk. But after the stairs, she said, voice shaking, I got scared. When I showed Paul the texts, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he made an appointment with a grief specialist the next morning. The therapist told him the truth he'd been avoiding. Ashley's grief had turned outward, attaching itself to me as a target. And until Ashley confronted that honestly, reconciliation might not be possible. Paul tried to get her to attend therapy with him. She refused. She left for college 2 weeks later. Boundaries were set. Contact would continue, but on his terms. For my safety, I stepped back completely. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something close to power. Not revenge. Clarity. People think the darkest moment is when you're bleeding, when you're on the floor, when sirens are screaming, when doctors are asking questions you can't answer fast enough. They're wrong. The darkest moment came later. It came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Ashley left for college, when the house was quiet in a way that finally gave my thoughts room to breathe and spiral. I was standing in this kitchen, staring at the pantry. Nothing dramatic. Just shelves, labels, food, and my hands started shaking. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd been using to survive until the danger was gone and my body didn't know how to stand down. My brain kept replaying moments like they were warning videos on a loop. Ashley ordering for me at breakfast. Ashley watching me eat. Ashley's eyes when she saw me on the stairs. Every sound in the house felt louder than it should have been. Every shadow seemed like movement. I caught myself locking the bedroom door at night, even though she wasn't there. That was when it hit me. I wasn't just afraid of Ashley. I was afraid of my own life. Paul noticed, of course. He always did. You don't have to be strong all the time, he said one night, sitting beside me on the couch. You don't have to carry this alone. And I wanted to believe him. But here was the truth I hadn't said out loud yet, even to myself. I didn't know if love was enough anymore. Not because I didn't love Paul, but because loving him meant being forever connected to the person who tried to kill me. That thought sat in my chest like a stone. I felt guilty for thinking it, ashamed even. What kind of wife wonders whether her marriage is survivable because of her husband's child? But guilt doesn't make fear disappear. Paul was grieving too. I could see it in the way he flinched when his phone buzzed, in the way he avoided the upstairs hallway near Ashley's old room, in the way he apologized for things that weren't his fault. We were both exhausted. One night I woke from a nightmare, convinced I was choking again. I couldn't breathe, not because my throat was closing, but because my body remembered what it felt like when it had. Paul held me until the shaking stopped. I should have protected you sooner, he whispered. And that's when something inside me finally broke, because I realized Paul wasn't just torn between his wife and his daughter. He was carrying responsibility for harm that had already happened, and I was carrying the weight of wondering whether staying meant risking my life again someday. That week, I asked myself questions I never thought I'd have to ask. What if Ashley came home unexpectedly? What if she relapsed into anger? What if Paul hesitated again, just for a second too long? I hated myself for thinking these things. But survival instincts don't care about morality. They care about patterns. And Ashley had shown a pattern of escalation. Words, then planning, then poisoning, then physical violence. Where did it stop? The worst part? I still felt empathy for her. I still understood her grief. I still mourned the girl she might have been if loss hadn't twisted into something sharp and dangerous. But empathy doesn't cancel consequences. And that realization, that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your safety, was the loneliest truth I'd ever sat with. I didn't cry that night. I just lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Paul breathe beside me, wondering whether choosing myself would eventually mean losing him. That was my lowest point. Not the hospital, not the stairs, but the quiet understanding that something had to change, or I would disappear piece by piece, trying to hold everything together. The shift didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic declaration or a slammed door or a single sentence that rewrote everything. It happened quietly, through truth finally surfacing in the hands of someone who had no reason to protect anyone's illusion. Her name was Laura, Rachel's sister. I received her email on a Thursday afternoon while grading essays, my red pen hovering uselessly over a paragraph I'd read 3 times without absorbing a word. She wrote gently, carefully. She said she'd heard, through Paul's parents, about what had happened. About Ashley, about me, about the fractures running through a family that never really healed after Rachel died. I don't want to take sides, she wrote, but I think you deserve to know something. We met for coffee the following week while Paul was at work. Laura arrived carrying a worn canvas bag. Inside were photo albums, old DVDs, a stack of things that looked like memories someone had been afraid to touch. She told me about Rachel's illness, how the fear came in waves, how some days Rachel was brave, and others she was just human. She admitted she'd pulled away after the funeral because it hurt too much to watch Paul and Ashley rebuild a life that no longer included her sister. Then she showed me the videos, home recordings. Rachel sitting on the couch, thinner than she should have been, smiling directly at the camera. If you're watching this, Rachel said softly, it means I'm not there anymore. And if Paul ever falls in love again, I hope it's with someone kind, someone who loves Ashley, someone who reminds him that life doesn't stop just because mine did. I felt my chest tighten, because this wasn't the Rachel Ashley had been holding on to. This wasn't fear and anger and loss frozen in ink. This was permission, hope, love without conditions. When I showed Paul the videos that night, he cried with his whole body, the kind of crying that bends you forward because standing upright is too much. I never knew, he kept saying. I never knew she felt this way. Laura offered to speak to Ashley. Paul agreed immediately. They met for dinner the following weekend. Paul came home drained, but lighter. He told me Ashley had resisted at first, accusing Laura of lying to protect me. But when Laura shared details only a sister would know, something shifted. Ashley watched part of the footage. She cried. She didn't apologize, but she didn't lash out either. It wasn't healing, but it was a crack in the wall. A few weeks later, Ashley's roommate called Paul. Ashley had stopped attending classes, barely left her dorm room. Paul drove 3 hours that night and brought her home to his parents' house. She started seeing a grief counselor twice a week. For the first time, someone professional named what had been happening. Unresolved grief, displaced rage, fixation. And here's where the turning point became real, for me. I wasn't asked to fix it. I wasn't asked to sacrifice my safety for someone else's healing. Paul didn't pressure me to reconnect, didn't ask me to be the bigger person. Instead, he said something that changed everything. You get to decide what contact feels safe for you, and I will support that. Not someday. Now, I chose distance, boundaries. And for the first time since this nightmare began, my nervous system exhaled. I realized something crucial then. Power doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself without apology. The fallout didn't come with a single explosion. It came in quiet, uneven waves, small reckonings stacking on top of each other until the truth could no longer be avoided by anyone involved. Ashley went back to college under strict conditions. Therapy was no longer optional. Paul made that clear. Tuition would be paid. Everything else depended on her willingness to engage honestly with treatment. Their phone calls, according to Paul, were tense but controlled. No yelling, no accusations. Just careful words and long pauses where emotions threatened to spill over. I wasn't part of those conversations. And for the first time, that didn't feel like rejection. It felt like protection. In September, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. From Ashley. My hands shook as I opened it. Not from fear this time, but from the weight of what it represented. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the first time she spoke without weapons. She wrote about therapy, about realizing she'd transferred all her anger onto me because I was visible, replaceable, easier to hate than death itself. She didn't mention Morocco or the stairs, but she acknowledged she'd caused harm. I'm working on it, she wrote. I don't expect forgiveness. That sentence mattered. Thanksgiving came and went in pieces. Ashley stayed with Paul's parents. Paul split the day, half with her, half with me. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't whole. But it was honest. And honesty, I was learning, was better than forced unity. Meanwhile, the consequences of Ashley's actions settled in ways she hadn't anticipated. Zoe cut contact. Paul's parents stopped excusing behavior they once softened with grief. Therapy forced Ashley to confront narratives she'd curated carefully, ones where she was always reacting, never choosing. And for me, my life grew quieter. Not smaller, quieter. I started therapy too, not because someone suggested it, but because I wanted my body back, my sense of ease, my relationship with food, with stairs, with my own home. The nightmares faded slowly. The panic attacks became manageable. Paul and I rebuilt trust, not because it had been broken between us, but because trauma demands you relearn safety together. Then came April. Ashley asked to meet, with a mediator present. I didn't agree right away, but when I did, I walked into that room steady. For the first time, Ashley told the whole truth. She admitted she'd intentionally put peanut butter in my food, admitted she'd wanted to hurt me, admitted she'd pushed me down the stairs out of rage. She didn't justify it. She didn't minimize it. She owned it. And I told her what it cost me. My health, my peace, my trust. We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile. But we named reality. That was the fallout. Not vengeance. Not punishment. Truth doing what it always does, reshaping everything it touches. It's been nearly a year since the night I woke up at the bottom of my own stairs. A year since my body learned what fear feels like when it's earned. Ashley finished her freshman year of college. She stayed in therapy. She didn't magically transform into someone else, but she changed in ways that mattered. She learned language for her grief. She learned that pain doesn't entitle you to harm. We've had mediated conversations since then. Slow, structured, careful. Trust hasn't returned. And it may never, but hostility has softened into something neutral, something survivable. The first time Ashley came back to our house for dinner, I watched her hands the entire time. I hated that about myself, but I didn't apologize for it. She noticed, and instead of getting angry, she said quietly, I understand. That mattered too. Paul and I are stronger, not because we endured something together, but because we refused to deny reality for the sake of comfort. He learned that protecting his child didn't mean sacrificing his wife. I learned that compassion doesn't require self-destruction. We are not a perfect blended family. We may never be, but we are honest and safe, and those two things are not negotiable. If there's a lesson here for anyone watching this who's living inside a situation that feels off, it's this. Love does not excuse danger. Empathy does not cancel accountability. And choosing yourself is not abandonment, it's survival. I don't know what the future holds for Ashley, or for Paul, or even for me, but I know this. I no longer wake up afraid in my own home. And that, after everything, is enough.